So after a few weeks of conversations and rumour and innuendo, Mauricio Pochettino has been named as Chelsea's next manager, replacing the caretaker manager Frank Lampard. So with that appointment fresh in the mind, I thought, why not see how Football Manager thinks Pochettino is going to do as manager of Chelsea. So I have used a real results mod from Mush7 on the Sorted Outside website. Link in the description below if you want to use this real results fixtures mod. I've started the game as late as I possibly can. So I believe we started this game world in May of 2023. So Chelsea ended up finishing, I'll show you actually. Chelsea ended up finishing 11th in the Premier League with Frank Lampard in charge for the final few games of the season. But now Poch is there. What can he do? How can he improve the team? What transfers is he going to make? Let's go and take a look at the end of his first season in charge. So here we are at the end of the 23-24 season, and it's been a very quiet transfer window, or at least it was in the past season for Chelsea in terms of incomings. But there is an outgoing that I want to show you, and that is this one here. Mason Mount moving to Manchester City for £53 million. Marco Correa also leaving to go to Southampton for £20 million. And sort of understandably, no real incomings for Poch and Chelsea in his first season in charge after all that money spent in January in real life. Just Luca Romero coming in, who is a youngster that they sent straight out on loan to Galatasaray, signed from Lazio, but didn't make an appearance last season. So we'll take a look at each competition one by one. So we'll start with the Carabao Cup, as that is the lowest rated competition that Chelsea were in this season, and they only made it to the third round, beating Coventry in the second round by 2-1, but coming up against Manchester City in the third round and being knocked out by a 1-goal defeat. But they had a bit more luck in the FA Cup, where they actually beat Manchester City on their way to lifting the FA Cup. They beat Newcastle, Brentford, Burnley and Fulham, as well as Manchester City on the way to the final, where they came up against Arsenal, went a goal down thanks to Jesus, but Kovacic and a brace from Sterling meant that they turned the game around and picked up Poch's first piece of silverware with Chelsea. And then in the Premier League, they managed to secure Champions League football after a season in the wilderness. After finishing 11th in the previous season, they have managed to finish third. 14 points off top of the table, Manchester City, but only 2 points off Liverpool in second, and a clear 10 points clear of Newcastle, who ended up finishing fifth and got a Champions League place. I'm assuming they won the Europa League. Scratch that, that'll be the new rule for the Champions League, won't it? Because of coefficients or however they're working out the extra places when it turns to the league phase. So a pretty good first season for Poch, his first trophy in the FA Cup, and back into the Champions League for Chelsea after missing out by a clear margin the previous season. Can he go any better next season? Well, like we did in the first season, we'll take a look at the transfers that were made, a few more incomings and some substantial money spent actually in this second season for Poch, bringing in Carlos Soler from PSG for £76 million, Ferdi Kadioglu from Fenerbahce for £17.5 million, and then Christian Eriksen, surprise pickup from Man United for £18.75 million. Hakim Ziyech was out the door for £11 million to West Ham, and then Malang Sarr was as well, alongside a few other lesser named players. So taking a look again, competition by competition, and the first trophy that anyone could win was the Community Shield, but Chelsea didn't win that. They lost 3-1. They were actually 3-0 down at one point. Foden with a brace, Bernardo Silva with a goal, Kai Havertz trying to get Chelsea back into it, but wasn't enough in the end, and they lost that one. In the Carabao Cup, they did a bit better than their first season with Poch in charge. They actually made the semi-finals. They beat MK Dons in the third round, Bournemouth in the fourth round, Nottingham Forest in the quarter-final, but got beaten by Arsenal in the semi-final, drawing the first leg away from home 2-2, but then losing at Stamford Bridge by 2-0. Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe with the 2 goals in that one after extra time. Next up, we have the FA Cup. Chelsea obviously defending champions in this one. They drew 1-1 in the third round with Man United, took it to a replay, beat them 2-1. Drew 0-0 with West Brom in the fourth round, took it to a replay, beat them 3-1. Beat Everton in the fifth round, then Luton in the quarter-final. Came up against Manchester City in the semi-final, and this time they lost on penalties. Erling Haaland putting City 1-0 up, Enzo Fernandez equalising, and Manchester City getting revenge for that first season defeat at this stage of the competition. And Chelsea making a return in the Champions League, and what a return it was. So in the league phase, they only lost one game. That was 1-0 to Napoli. They beat Juve, FC Midtjylland, Slavia Prague, Roma and Lucerne, drawing with Real Madrid and Real Sociedad. They got Ajax in the round of 16, beat them. Real Madrid in the quarterfinals, beat them. And Dortmund in the semi-finals, beat them. And it was an all-English Champions League final. And Kai Havertz and Datro Fofana led Chelsea to Champions League glory. So another trophy picked up for Poch. In his second season, he has turned Chelsea around from being 11th place in the Premier League to winning the Champions League. And then in the Premier League, it was another third place finish for Chelsea. 2 points behind second place Arsenal this time. 12 points behind Manchester City, which I think is a slightly smaller gap than their first season, but don't quote me on it. And then they ended up finishing 5 points ahead of 5th place Manchester United. So all in all, a pretty decent second season for Poch at Chelsea. He's got the glory of playing in the Club World Championship next season, as well as a UEFA Super Cup to try and win. So let's see how he gets on in that third season. So Poch was a bit of a busy boy in the transfer market, bringing in Ousmane Diomande from Sporting, Kyle Walker from Man City, Vitinha from PSG, Ozan Kabak from Hoffenheim, former Liverpool player there, and Kostas Tsimikas on loan from Liverpool throughout the 25-26 season, spending £118 million in total. In terms of selling players, he got rid of Armando Broja, who went to Crystal Palace for an amazing £36 million. Trevor Chalobah went to Brentford for £24 million. Ruben Loftus-Cheek left to go to Aston Villa for £12 million. And Kalidou Koulibaly went to Lyon for £2.5 million. I was going to say that's a bit of a bargain, but Koulibaly's probably about 35 now. 35 years old. Not that much of a bargain. So the first bit of silverware that was up for grabs for Chelsea was actually in pre-season. It was the Club World Championship, which they qualified for. They actually started at the end of the 24-25 season. They drew 2-2 with Boca in their first group game and then beat Sundowns 3-0 in the second group game, but then lost 1-0 to Liverpool in the quarterfinals. Van Dijk getting the one goal in that one. And then thanks to their Champions League victory, they had the UEFA Super Cup, and they beat Spurs 1-0 in that. Kai Havertz with the only goal of the game against the Tottenham side that must have actually won a trophy for once. Then we have the Carabao Cup that Chelsea haven't really fared very well in with Poch in charge, and same thing happened here. A third round win over Manchester United, fourth round win over West Ham, but then knocked out in the quarters by Liverpool. Enzo Fernandez scoring the only Chelsea goal in a game where Jota gave Liverpool a 2-goal lead. In the FA Cup, not much luck there either, beating Ipswich and Middlesbrough in the third and fourth rounds, but falling to Hull in the FA Cup fifth round by 2-1. They got off to a perfect start with Sterling scoring early on, but by the 21st minute, they were 2-1 down. Hull even in the Premier League? Were they in the Premier League? No, they were in the Championship. That is a massive, massive disappointment for Chelsea, losing to Hull in the FA Cup. In the Champions League, though, they did find some form, and again, actually this time they lost twice in the league phase, but picked up one less draw. They lost to PSG and to Rennes, so a bit of a fear of French sides, it seems, this season for Chelsea. They did, however, beat Porto, Servette, Dinamo Kiev, Roma and Banik Ostrava, and drew 1-1 with Inter in the knockout rounds. They knocked out Roma in the round of 16, Barcelona in the quarterfinals, but couldn't get past Arsenal in the semi-final. I think Arsenal were the team that they beat in the final to win it, so Arsenal getting a bit of revenge there. And then in the Premier League, once again, they're nothing if not consistent. A third place finish for Chelsea. This time, though, there seemed to be a bit of a title race. Arsenal finishing just 1 point off Manchester City in second place. Chelsea, though, 12 points adrift of second place Arsenal and 5 points clear of fifth place Liverpool. 6 teams from England in the Champions League for next season, just noticed there. Both Liverpool and Aston Villa qualifying. Insanity. So season 4, I think we're up to now, and there's one hell of an incoming from Pochettino and Chelsea here. Aurelien Tchouameni signed from Real Madrid, if I can get my words out, for £140 million. That is some amount of money. Then they signed Adilson, who I'm guessing is a youngster from Internacional in Brazil. Alexandre Aliero from Stade Reims for pennies. João Mario brought in from Porto for £28 million. Eddie Diaz for a very lowly fee from Junior. And Ismail Bennacer signed on loan from Newcastle. I'm well aware of him from my Milan save. In terms of the outgoings, Benoit Badiashile went to Man United for 28 million. Conor Gallagher went to Porto for 23.5 million. And then there's several other players. I'm pretty sure Ferdi Kadioglu was just brought in a couple of seasons ago. He was signed from Fenerbahce for 17.5 million. And he's gone now for 17 point. Nice bit of profit there. 250k profit for Ferdi Kadioglu. And did he play for Chelsea at all? He did, actually, to be fair. He did pretty well in his second season and loaned out to Milan. And now he's at West Ham. So he's everywhere. Just moving around. So no Community Shield or Super Cup or Club World Championship for Chelsea this season. But the Carabao Cup is where we start things off. They managed to beat Leeds, Everton and Newcastle on their way to the semi-finals, where they came up against Leicester. They beat them 3-2 away from home in the first leg, but lost 3-2 in the second leg and ended up being knocked out on penalties. So no Carabao Cup victory at all yet for Poch. And in the FA Cup, still just couldn't get past that semi-final mark. Just the one FA Cup, of course, for Poch so far, beating Portsmouth, Sheffield United, Sunderland and Manchester City on the way to the semis, where they lost once again to Leicester in a domestic cup competition. Lorenzo Luca and Ben Davies getting the 2 goals for Leicester in the first half, and then Enzo Fernandez trying to get Chelsea back into the game, but it was a bit too late on the 75th minute. But then in the Champions League, they managed to make it all the way to the semi-finals once more. In the league phase, however, that is some very, very poor form. They had 3 draws to PSG, Lazio and WSG Tyrrell. Who the hell are WSG Tyrrell? They're an Austrian Premier Division side. Never even heard of them, but Chelsea drew 1-1 with them. They lost to Porto. They managed to beat Manchester City. They lost to Dortmund, beat Ghent and Sevilla. Made it through in the top 26, so had to play a knockout playoff round, and that was against Spurs, which they won over 2 legs. They beat Dortmund in the round of 16, Juve in the quarterfinals, but then a 0-0 draw at Stamford Bridge and a 2-1 defeat at Anfield sent them out of the competition at the semi-final stage. But they did, however, win Poch's first Premier League title. It's taken 4 seasons, but he's done it, finishing 2 points ahead of Manchester City, who were second and well clear of the rest of the chasing pack. So that's a Premier League title in the bag for Pochettino. He's almost picked up all the competitions now. All he needs for the complete set is the Carabao Cup, or maybe he's won the Community Shield. Did he win the Community Shield? No, he won the Super Cup. So he needs a Community Shield as well. But is that really a trophy? So taking a look at the transfers brought in his 5th season at Chelsea, and Ishmael Benesa was made a permanent player after his loan spell from Newcastle, signed for £43.5 million. Nelson Wiper has been brought in from Freiburg for £49 million, German striker. Jan Sommer brought in from Inter for £1 million. He's now a manager, so he must have literally just spent 1 season with Chelsea. Tete brought in from Porto for, how much is that, £58 million? Joe Eccles, now that doesn't sound like an Italian name to me, an English striker, 19 years old, signed from Spezia for £4.6 million, and Davy, I'll go with Davy, sounds a bit more weird for is he Brazilian? Yeah, Davy the Brazilian, brought in $15.75 million from Flamengo. In terms of outgoings, Cesar Casadei was sold to Juve for £49 million, Christian Pulisic has gone to Inter for £30 million, Kovacic has gone to PSG for £19 million, and Gabriel Slanina has gone to Bayer Leverkusen for £24.5 million. Lots of big money sales here. Carlos Soler's also gone, Malo Gusto, and Kepa has left for Athletic Bilbao. So we'll kick off with the Community Shield, and it is a Community Shield victory finally for Poch. A 3-0 win, comfortable in the end over Aston Villa. Sterling with a goal and Kai Havertz with a brace. And in the Carabao Cup, they've won the Carabao Cup as well, so that was the final trophy that he needed to win to complete his collection. They beat Lincoln, Exeter and Brentford and Manchester United on the way to the final, where they faced Crystal Palace, and Nelson Wiper absolutely wiped the floor with Palace as he grabbed himself a brace, sending Chelsea on their way to Poch's first Carabao Cup win. And in the FA Cup, he nearly made it a domestic double, but he couldn't quite, beating Fulham, Aston Villa, Norwich, Brentford and Arsenal on the way to an FA Cup final against Manchester City, where they lost to a very early Bernardo Silva goal. And in the Champions League, a bit better in the league phase, a lot better in the league phase than they did the previous season, losing only to Juve, drawing with Barcelona, but then beating Ajax, Leipzig, Apoel, Milan, Shakhtar and Bayer Leverkusen. got through to the round of 16 and beat Athletic Bilbao, but then knocked out by Arsenal despite winning the home leg. 2-0 defeat in the away leg was just enough for Arsenal to go through. And in the Premier League, he actually had his worst ever finish, finishing 4th in the Premier League, level on points with Manchester United, just qualifying in 4th spot on goal difference, finishing 8 points adrift of 3rd place Liverpool and 15 points adrift of top of the table Arsenal. So pretty successful season in terms of domestic cup competitions, but elsewhere, especially in the major trophies, a bit lacking in this season. So we're into Poch's 6th season, or at the end of Poch's 6th season in charge of Chelsea, and 3 signings made in that season. Mateus Nunes coming from Tottenham for £47 million, Stefano Turati coming from Sassuolo for £25 million, and Evan Nielsen from Porto for £37.5 million. In terms of outgoings, there's not many outgoings there. A lot less loans and free transfers than there has been. But Matt Blake has gone to Milan for £32.5 million, a young English right back. Datro Fofana left to go to Leicester for £22 million. Noni Madueke's gone to Wolves for £16.5 million. Edouard Mendy's gone to Leipzig. Lewis Hall's Southampton. And Jimmy J. Morgan, interesting name. Is he American? He's English. Name like Jimmy J. That sounds American if I've ever heard of one. He's gone to Blackburn for £1.8 million. So we'll kick things off for this season with the Carabao Cup, and it didn't last very long at all, losing on penalties in the 3rd round of the Cup to Manchester United. Luca Romero picking up a red card after just 4 minutes, and I'm guessing that just ended the game as a competitive tie for Chelsea. And the FA Cup wasn't much better, losing in the 3rd round to Liverpool after a replay, drawing 1-1 at Anfield and then losing 2-1 at home. Enzo Fernandez putting Chelsea ahead, but Ben Doak and Wilfred Gnonto scoring for Liverpool. Wilfred Gnonto's playing for Liverpool. In the Champions League, it's Chelsea's worst performing Champions League season. It's not gone well for Poch this year, it seems. They beat Dortmund, Milan, Qarabag, Rangers, Vitoria Guimarães and Benfica in the league phase, losing to Juve and drawing with Barcelona. Got drawn against Benfica again in the round of 16 and lost over 2 legs. Lost 2-0 in Benfica and then only a 1-0 win at Stamford Bridge. Wasn't enough. Kai Havertz goal not enough to take them through to the next round. But how did they do in the Premier League? They came 3rd. So it's another solid Champions League position. Can't really complain about that. Only 4 points off Arsenal, who ended up winning the league. 3 points adrift of 2nd place Man City and 2 points clear of 5th place Tottenham. But 6 teams in the Champions League seems to be a bit of a theme that's reoccurring now in England. I'm guessing that's probably going to happen in real life if the extra spots in the Champions League are based on coefficient rankings. For a second, I thought that was the first season that we've not seen him lift a trophy, but he actually didn't lift a trophy in 2026 either. So joint level with his most disappointing season. It probably is his most disappointing season if you bear in mind that he was out of the cup competitions fairly early and the Champions League as well. So is Poch on a downward spiral now in his heading into his 7th season in charge? Just had to count there. It's been a lot of seasons. It's got longevity, if anything. If we can take anything from this, he's going to be there a while. A Chelsea manager being there for 6 or more years. It's not really realistic, is it? Well, Poch is still there in his 7th season, just completed the 7th season at Chelsea, and they signed Jared Bowen, who was playing at Newcastle for £27 million. Jonathan David bought from Aston Villa for £51 million, and Michael Elise from Man United for £46.5 million. So a lot of spending money for Poch. The spending continues, and they actually sold Mykhailo Mudryk to PSG for £53 million. Tete went to Hoffenheim for £16.5 million, and then a few other lesser priced sales as well. So we'll kick things off with the Club World Championship. They played their first game at the end of the last season. Technically, they beat Al Sadd by 2-1, then beat SCP. Oh, is that Palmeiras? I think that's Palmeiras. 3-1. It's a massive test of my logo knowledge, this. If I just click on it, I'd be able to read and see that it does say Palmeiras. They beat Real Madrid in the quarter-final and then lost to Liverpool again in the Club World Championship. Liverpool beat them the last time they were in it as well, losing on penalties this time in the semi-final. Went through the 3rd place playoff and ended up finishing 4th, losing 2-1 to Barcelona. Mykhailo Mudryk, though, getting on the score sheet in that one, obviously, before he'd been sold. In the Carabao Cup, a bit better than last season, but still not great. ending their time in the Carabao Cup at the quarter-final stage after beating Luton and Aston Villa in the 3rd and 4th rounds. They lost on penalties to Liverpool in the quarter-final. FA Cup, even better. They beat Exeter, Bournemouth, Newcastle and Fulham on their way to a semi-final against Liverpool. Liverpool beat them again on penalties. Again, a 2-2 draw. Jared Bowen gave Chelsea the lead. Darwin Núñez equalised from the penalty spot. And then I'm guessing those other 2 goals were in extra time as Darwin Núñez scored again and Jonathan David's penalty sent it to a penalty shootout. But then we have another trophy for Poch in the Champions League this time. So in the league phase, they only lost to Union Berlin and Rennes, 2 teams you would not expect them to be losing to, and drew 2-2 with Napoli, beating Real Madrid, Inter, Milan, Basel and Genk, beating West Ham in the knockout playoff round. What are West Ham doing there? Beating Union Berlin in the round of 16, Barcelona in the quarter-final, PSG in the semi-final, and then beating fellow English side Manchester City in the final. Phil Foden giving City the lead early on, but Aurelien Tchouameni and Kai Havertz turning the game on its head and gifting Poch his second Champions League trophy. And then in the Premier League, it was relatively close, but Chelsea finishing second, 4 points behind Arsenal in first, but 5 points clear of City in third. So a pretty decent season, a Champions League trophy and a second place finish in the league. Can't really complain about that. Let's take a look at his 8th season and take a look at the signings that he made in that 8th season. So Arsene Zakarian signed from Borussia Mönchengladbach for £34 million. Ilaix Mariba signed from Bayern for £39.5 million. And Ez Abde signed for a hefty fee of £85 million from Atletico Madrid. In terms of sales, Michael Olise left for £42 million, which I think is pretty similar to the amount that they bought him for. He went to Brentford. Ian Martson sold to Stuttgart for £23 million. Matthias Nunes to PSG for £15.25 million. Ishmael Benacer has gone to Hoffenheim for £12.25 million. And then Adam Zalabi, who I'm not even sure who he is. He's a right back, an English right back in a regen. He has gone to Leicester for £7.75 million. So thanks to that Champions League victory last season, Chelsea started off their season with a UEFA Super Cup win over Newcastle United, 3-0 in the end. Jared Bowen, Kai Havertz and Nelson Wiper with the goals to get Chelsea their first piece of silverware of the season. But then in the Carabao Cup, it went awfully wrong for them. Blackpool was the only team that they managed to beat in the 3rd round, and then they lost 2-0 to Watford in the 4th round. Were Watford a Premier League team, does that sort of softens the blow a little bit. They were a Premier League team at the time, and still are actually. In the FA Cup, Chelsea doing a bit better in this domestic cup competition, beating QPR, West Ham, Wigan and Spurs on the way to the semi-final where they lost in extra time to Liverpool. Liverpool being a bit of a bogey team for Chelsea in this experiment. Roberto Calvo with the goal to Liverpool after Kai Havertz had put Chelsea 1-0 up after 1 minute. Darwin Núñez scoring what turned out to be the winner in extra time. And the Champions League didn't even go that well for Chelsea this season either. Dropping points, drawing against Bayern, Real Madrid and Porto. Bayern and Real Madrid, that's sort of understandable. Porto less so. We'll get on to Porto as well. I've just looked a bit further down. They did, however, beat Leipzig, Betis, Monaco, Ferencváros and Olympiacos in the league phase. That seems like a very easy league phase for Chelsea there. But then in the round of 16, they faced Porto again, lost 2-1 away from home, and only managed a 0-0 draw at Stamford Bridge. So knocked out of the Champions League at the round of 16 stage for, I believe, only the 2nd time. But they did manage to win Pochettino's 2nd Premier League title, finishing 4 points ahead of 2nd place West Ham United. What a crazy world we're living in. So a 2nd Premier League title for Poch and another pretty decent season all in all. So season 9 is over and Poch has been a busy boy in the transfer market once more. Ferran Torres signed from PSG for £25 million. Nicolo Fagioli bought from Dortmund for £34.5 million. Rodrigo Ribeiro from Sporting for £84 million. And Vitaly Mykolenko signed from Everton for £15 million. And in terms of sales, Ez Abdi, who was signed just a few seasons ago, he's gone to Leeds for £30 million. Jonathan David to Brentford for £31.5 million. Leeds spending the cash like it's going out of fashion, signing Ozan Kabak for £21 million. Adelson's gone to Lyon for £15 million. And ageing Ben Chilwell has gone to Liverpool for £2 million. And at Chelsea, getting revenge for those defeats to Liverpool in the previous season. I think it was the previous season anyway. Beating Liverpool on penalties. Will Jackson giving Chelsea an early lead. Patson Daka, what is he doing at Liverpool? Equalising just before full time, but then Chelsea winning on penalties. And in the Carabao Cup, finally Chelsea have won another Carabao Cup. They beat Southampton, Manchester United, Bristol City and Bournemouth on the way to a cup final against Arsenal, where Enzo Fernandez scored the only goal of the game to bring the Carabao Cup back to Stamford Bridge. Not as successful in the FA Cup though. They beat Wimbledon and Luton but lost 2-1 to Brentford in the 5th round. An early goal from Joe Eccles looked like they were going to be on their way to an easy victory, but Frederick de Wilde and Michael Elise with goals to turn the game around and give Brentford the lead and the win in the 5th round of the FA Cup. In the Champions League, Chelsea doing pretty well in the league phase, unbeaten, drawing to Başak Şehir and Manchester City and beating Leipzig, West Ham, Club Brugge, FC Porto, Espanyol and Red Bull Salzburg. Round of 16 game they played against Wolfsburg, beat them quite handily, not even conceding a goal. They beat Manchester United and didn't concede a goal in the quarterfinals, but then they conceded 3 goals across 2 legs in the semi-finals against Arsenal and got themselves knocked out of the Champions League. And then in the Premier League, the worst performance so far from a Chelsea side with Poch in charge. 5th place finish still means Champions League football because of the new rules, but hefty 21 points adrift of Arsenal in 1st. Bearing in mind Chelsea were league champions last season, a bit of a fall from grace. Could we be seeing the end of Poch's time in charge? And the answer to that is not quite. So Poch has left by the time I've advanced to the end of the 2032-33 season. However, he was in charge until the 23rd of May, which I believe would have been the end of the season. So all these transfers were made by him, apart from this one, Thomas Hollick, so we'll ignore that. But Andreas Schelderup brought in on a free from Bayer Leverkusen. That's a pretty good deal, that. And Hosu Kanessa from Colo Colo for pennies. In terms of outgoings, Luca Romero, obviously his first ever signing, has been moved on to Manchester City for £42 million. Alan Shan to Leeds for £25 million. Alan Potter to Southampton for £31 million. And Mikalenko's gone to Freiburg for £1.8 million. But he is very, very old now. So how has the Chelsea team done in Poch's final season in charge? Why was he sacked? So we'll start with the Carabao Cup. They made it to the semi-finals, beating MK Dons, Bristol City and Sheffield United, but they lost 3-1 on aggregate to Manchester United in the semi-finals. He won a trophy. He won the FA Cup. They beat Exeter, Manchester City, Fulham, Aston Villa and Spurs on the way to a cup final against Everton, where Everton took the lead. Yusuf Shamiti with a goal, Evan Nielsen getting a brace and Joe Eccles getting the 3rd for Chelsea to give Poch a second FA Cup win, I think, if my notes are correct. And then in the Champions League, they did pretty well as well. They drew against PSV, Dortmund and Porto in the league phase, but beat Bayern, Rennes, Genk, Rangers and Ajax. Were drawn against Monaco in the round of 16, beat them 4-0 in aggregate, but then 2-1 defeats to Roma in the quarterfinal of the Champions League sent them packing. And I'm guessing it's going to be the league position that has been the final nail in the coffin for Pochettino. So I can see already that they didn't win it because Arsenal are the holders. Oh my God, they're 8th. Okay, yeah, we could see last season the drop-off that was coming, to be fair. Chelsea finishing 5th in the previous season, finishing 8th this season. I can see exactly why Pochettino's been sacked. But what a time in charge. If this comes to fruition for you, if he gets even half of the trophies that he's won, will that be no, it won't be a success. But if this comes to fruition, that'll be a nice 10 years in charge of the occasional cup victory and a couple of Premier League wins as well for you Chelsea fans out there. So in his 10-year spell with Chelsea, he won the Community Shield twice, the Carabao Cup twice, the FA Cup twice, the Super Cup twice, the Champions League twice, and the Premier Division, the Premier League I should say, twice. So it's not 3 that's the magic number for Pochettino. It's in fact 2. That is the magic number for Pochettino. So that is it for this experiment video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comments down below. Hit the like button if you did as well. Subscribe to the channel to get all my content when it comes out. I'll be doing a few more of these experiment videos in the near future. And keep an eye out for a new mini-series that I'm doing on the channel. I'll give you a bit of a spoiler. So it's going to be using that real results mod that I mentioned. I'll be starting the save at the end of April. So there'll be like 8 league games left, 6 to 8 league games left. And I'm going to try and either save teams from relegation. So I think Southampton's going to be my first one. I'm going to try and save them from relegation across 6 or 8 games or however many games it is. And then we'll do other ones elsewhere in Europe as well. Maybe I'm thinking maybe Millwall in the Championship. trying to get them into the playoffs, because obviously they were in a playoff place up until the final day of the championship season. So we'll see what we can do there. But yeah, that's all coming up in the future. But that is it for this episode. I'll see you next time.